My name is Tara Westover, and I am the author of Educated. It's a memoir. I very modestly wrote a book about myself. So that means I need to tell you a bit, I guess, about me. I was raised the youngest of 7 children on a mountain in rural Idaho. My father was a survivalist, which means he was convinced that the world was ending, and he felt that we needed to be prepared for that. And for my father, what that meant was that we needed a 10-year supply of food, which is quite a lot of food, actually, if you have 9 people and you want to feed them for 10 years. So I spent a lot of my childhood canning peaches. My dad had another set of kind of different ideas. He was opposed to a lot of the institutions that most people tend to take for granted, doctors and hospitals, really anything to do with the government, which is why we never went to the doctor. And I also didn't have a birth certificate till I was 9 years old. Another thing that my father opposed was public education, which is why I was never put in school. When I was 17, I found my way to a university, and I set foot in a classroom for the first time. I was pretty much woefully unprepared. In one of my first lectures, for example, I raised my hand and I asked what the Holocaust was, because I just never heard of it before. This is not something I recommend doing, actually. The other students, understandably, did not occur to them that I genuinely didn't know what it was, so they very much heard that as a denial. You know, what is this? Not what is this? So of course they thought I was being anti-Semitic, but I wasn't. I genuinely had never heard of it. I had to go to a computer lab and I had to type the phrase into a search engine, you know, what is a Holocaust? Then the world shifted a bit. I lived the first 17 years of my life in a world where the Holocaust had never happened. And then on a Thursday afternoon, it happened all at once. I'll tell you another thing that happened all at once for me, and that was the civil rights movement. I remember the professor telling us about Rosa Parks, and I remember him telling us that she had been arrested for taking a seat on a bus. And of course, I didn't know anything about the civil rights movement. I had no idea what we were talking about. And so when he said that she'd been arrested for taking a seat on a bus, I understood him as saying that she had been arrested for stealing the bus seat. It was kind of an unfortunate misunderstanding of take a seat versus to take the seat. So I was still kind of wondering, what exactly did she want with that old bus seat? When that image changed to the smiling face of Emmett Till, and I was still asking myself, how did she actually get it loose? I mean, what tools do you even need to take a bus seat out? When that image of Emmett Till changed to that of a corpse, those two images of the stoic woman whose fingers are being pushed into an ink pad, and then, of course, of a mangled body, mixed in my mind, and they were completely nonsensical. I could not understand them. It made no sense to me to think that in my country, in the living memory of my mother, who to me always seemed young, there would have been a time that someone could be arrested for taking a seat on a bus. It's actually the kind of thing that doesn't make a lot of sense, and even now, as I stand here telling you the story, I'm tempted to defend my misconception as making a lot more sense than what turned out to be the truth. The summer that after I learned about the civil rights movement, I returned back home and I was working in my father's junkyard. And there was a nickname that my brother had for me, and I'd acquired this nickname when I was younger, when I was working in the junkyard, and I would get grease on my hands and I would brush my hair out of my face, and my face would get smeared with grease. And my brother had developed a nickname for me that I had been answering to for many years. And the name is a slur, and I'm not going to say it here, but the first time I went back after taking this course, and I was working in the junkyard, and my brother called me this name again, I wrote about what that felt like, and I'd like to read that passage now. I couldn't articulate how the name made me feel. Sean had meant it to humiliate me, to lock me in time into an old idea of myself. But far from fixing me in place, that word transported me. Every time he said it, I returned to the university, to that auditorium, where I watched human history unfold and wondered at my place in it. The stories of Emmett Till, Rosa Parks, and Martin Luther King were called to my mind every time Sean shouted at me to move to the next row. I saw their faces superimposed on every purlin Sean welded into place that summer, so that by the end of it, I had finally begun to grasp something that should have been immediately apparent, that someone had opposed the great march toward equality. Someone had been the person from whom freedom had to be wrested. I did not think of my brother as that person. I doubt I will ever think of him that way. But something had shifted nonetheless. I had started on a path of awareness, had perceived something elemental about my brother, my father, myself. I had discerned the ways in which we had been sculpted by a tradition given to us by others, a tradition of which we were either willfully or accidentally ignorant. I had begun to understand that we had lent our voices to a discourse whose sole purpose was to dehumanize and brutalize others, because nurturing that discourse was easier, because retaining power always feels like the way forward. I could not have articulated this, not as I sweated through those searing afternoons in the forklift. I did not have the language I have now. But I understood this one fact, that 1,000 times I had been called that name and laughed, and now I could not laugh. The word and the way Sean said it hadn't changed, only my ears were different. They no longer heard the jingle of a joke in it. What they heard was a signal, a call through time, which was answered with a mounting conviction that never again would I allow myself to be made a foot soldier in a conflict I did not understand. After I learned about the civil rights movement, I kept studying. History had given me new ways of thinking about the world, maybe a reason to discard a prejudice that I really hadn't even been aware I was carrying. After history, I studied feminism, and I learned to discard other prejudices, maybe prejudices I held against myself. That is to say, I learned to reject antiquated definitions of what I was and what I was capable of doing, definitions of me that had been given to me by other people that I'd believed in my whole life. From those pages, I drew to myself a radical new conviction, that you don't have to believe something about yourself just because someone else believes it, even if it's someone that you love. After that, I studied psychology. I think it might be the fear of every parent that their kid goes to school and takes Psych 101 and then comes back and psychoanalyzes them, which is exactly what happened. But what I learned, I'm not a psychologist, I have no idea if it was accurate, but what I learned gave me a new way of understanding my childhood, of understanding why my father had kept me out of school, the paranoia behind that, why we'd been denied medical care because he was frightened of doctors, why an older brother of mine who was violent toward me, towards others, had been allowed to go unchecked. And as I said, I have no idea if my amateur analysis is in any way accurate, but I do know that it helped me find peace with the way that I was raised. Here's what my education did not do for me. It did not allow me to become a new person and to keep my old life. I thought that it would. Somehow I thought that I could leave the mountain and return to it unchanged, that I could travel and see the world and then live as if I hadn't seen it. But I couldn't. 10 years after I set foot in that classroom for the first time, I graduated from the University of Cambridge with a PhD, and everything was different. I was professional, I was employable, I was educated. But I was also estranged from half of my family. There's a lot that I could say about what my education gave me and the price I paid for it. But we're here today to talk about students. And because there's not a lot of time, I figured I would focus on just one message that I might have for students. And it's not actually about what education is so much as it's about what education isn't. So here's the message. An education is not job training. I think education is not so much about making a living. I think it's more about making a person. I think it's natural to hope that a degree will make you more employable, but I'm not sure that that's its higher purpose. The magic of an education is not that it makes you of use to employers. It's that it makes you of use to yourself. It gives you that thing that can be got in no other way. It gives you perspective. I'm going to close my remarks with one final story about perspective. In my mid-20s, I had to make a difficult choice. I could go back to my old life, or I could leave that life behind, could leave my family behind. They could not change. They were not able to reject my brother's violence, and I was not able to accept that. So I had to make a choice between myself and my family. And for a lot of years, I chose my family because I love my family, and I thought that love meant that everything would be okay and that I should stay. I guess I didn't yet understand that love has limits, that love could be real, and yet somehow maybe not enough. I'd always been taught that love is supposed to conquer all. Eventually, I would come to understand that it does. It conquers all, or maybe it just survives all. Whatever happens to it, it seems to live on. But living or not, love is just love, and it doesn't grant you control of the universe. It doesn't mean that you can choose how the story will end or keep bad things from happening. Sometimes I wonder if the only way you can really respect love is by respecting its limits, that loving someone doesn't actually give you the power to change them, because love isn't about power. I suppose that's why I believe you can love someone and still choose to say goodbye to them, because the love persists no matter what you choose. The second reason I think I chose my family for so long was because I lacked imagination. I simply could not imagine any kind of life that I would want that did not have my family in it. Put simply, I lacked perspective. And ultimately, I suppose that is what my education gave me. That is what I gained from those moments of venturing outside my own mind and into other minds, other worlds. Those brief journeys gave me an awareness of my own life, a knowledge that the life I was living at that moment was just one of many possible lives, that there could be others. There's a scripture that I loved when I was a child, and I love it still. The scripture is Hebrews 11:1, and it is about faith. It's about what faith is. And the scripture tells us that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the essence of things not seen. My story may be unique in some ways, but it's my belief that many students discover what I discovered, which is that contrary to what you might think, what's difficult about growing up in a troubled family is not childhood, but adulthood. Not the past, but the iron grip that the past so often seems to have on the present and on the future. And I think that's maybe because we humans tend to recreate the reality as we first experienced it. We form our beliefs when we're young about the way men are, about the way women are, about the way people are. And then we go out into the world and we draw those people to us who will confirm our beliefs. In short, we rebuild the prison we've just escaped from over and over. It's my contention that we don't have to be trapped in our minds, in the past, in our experiences, or even in our cynical beliefs about what the world is and what we are. Escape from all that, that's what education offers. It offers faith, the substance of things hoped for, evidence for things we've not seen. It takes us out of our narrow, dim reality and shows us the existence of brighter worlds. It is the capacity to imagine that which we have not directly experienced, to break old patterns and live new lives, stubbornly believing in love we may not have witnessed, trying to see life not only as it is, but maybe as it could be. Thank you.